thought a financial bombshell just rocked the North American auto industry, and it's sending shockwaves straight to the boardrooms of Ford and General Motors. As we hit the ground in 2026, the political landscape in Washington, D.C. has turned into an absolute minefield for Detroit. Imagine waking up to find that the price of your dream truck just spiked by $5,000 overnight because of a secret tax hidden in the metal. With the 2026 midterm elections looming and the mandatory USMCA review scheduled for this July, the stakes for your wallet have never been higher. President Trump has recently threatened a staggering 100% tariff on all Canadian goods if Prime Minister Mark Carney moves forward with a controversial trade pact with China, a move that could effectively decouple the world's most integrated supply chain overnight. While the Supreme Court weighs the legality of these emergency-based tariffs, the reality on the ground is already shifting. GM has just slashed shifts at its Oshawa plant to appease Washington's America First mandates, and the era of clean energy subsidies is being dismantled, leaving Ford and GM to fight an EV slowdown without the government safety nets they once relied on. A move by Canada, the biggest supplier of new aluminum to the United States, has put Detroit on high alert. This isn't some far-off trade spat. It's a direct threat to the price of your next truck and the stability of the entire automaking world. The numbers are serious. We're talking about a new financial burden that could add up to $1 billion headache for GM and Ford combined. These aren't just figures on a spreadsheet. They represent a real crisis that has opened up almost overnight. Now, automakers are scrambling to figure out how to avoid getting sucked in. The fallout from this could add an estimated $400 to the sticker price of the average new vehicle. That's not a guess. It's the cold, hard math of a trade relationship that's just been turned into a weapon. The era of cheap, easy resources that built the modern auto industry seems to be over. What's happening between the US and Canada isn't just a disagreement. It's an economic conflict fought with tariffs and complex rules. With Detroit's biggest names caught right in the crossfire, the very foundation of North Cassider, American auto production is being tested, and this crisis is unfolding in real time. So what's actually happening? The title says Canada hiked aluminum prices, but the truth is a lot more complicated and honestly a lot more interesting. This isn't a simple case of a supplier jacking up their rates. This is the story of how aggressive US trade policies accidentally laid a trap and how Canada has now cleverly sprung it using American laws against American companies. To get how we got here and why your next F-150 or Chevy Silverado is about to get more expensive, we need to unravel this whole mess. And it all starts not in Ottawa, but in Washington, D.C. This story really kicks off with a powerful tool of economic policy, the Section 232 tariff. Citing national security concerns, the United States government made a decision that would change the game for North American trade. To protect domestic metal producers, the U.S. reinstated tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. We're talking about a 25% tariff on Canadian aluminum that went into effect in early 2025. For decades, the North American auto industry has worked like one big, deeply integrated machine. A single part might cross the U.S. Canada border multiple times before it ends up in a finished car. The whole system was built on the idea of free and open trade. Well, that 25% tariff just shattered that idea. Suddenly, the most critical raw material for modern vehicles, the very metal that makes up the body of the best-selling Ford F-150, was 25% more expensive to bring into the country. Now, you're probably thinking, wait, if the US imposed the tariff, why is the headline blaming Canada? This is the heart of the issue. And it's where things get strategically brilliant on Canada's part and devastatingly expensive for automakers. Canadian aluminum producers didn't just eat that 25% cost. They didn't stop shipping the metal. Instead, they passed the cost on using a mechanism known as the Midwest Premium. Think of it like this. There's the global price of aluminum set on big exchanges. Then there's a delivery charge or a premium to get that metal to a specific region. The Midwest premium is the surcharge for delivering aluminum to the industrial heartland of the United States, right where the auto factories are. What Canadian suppliers have done is inflate this premium to cover the cost of the US tariff. It's their way of saying to Ford and GM, you want our aluminum? No problem, but you're going to pay for the tariff your own government imposed. This isn't a normal price increase. It's a direct pass-through of the tariff. It's a financial chess move that keeps Canadian producers whole while US automakers foot the entire bill for their own government's policy. This is why if you're a CFO at GM or Ford, it feels exactly like a Canadian price hike. The invoice is higher, the cost of raw materials has jumped. They are paying hundreds of millions more for the exact same product they were buying last year. But the cause isn't simple supply and demand. It's the result of a US policy that backfired, giving Canada all the leverage it needed. The United States loaded the weapon with its tariffs, and Canada is now pulling the trigger, aiming it squarely at the American auto industry. For Ford and General Motors, this isn't some abstract trade problem. It's a five-alarm fire in the accounting department. The cost increase is $1 billion annual crisis for just two companies, an unplanned expense that could seriously eat into profits and force them to rethink their entire production strategy. What could they do with that kind of money? We're talking about capital that could have been used for R&D on new electric vehicles, for upgrading plants, or for hiring more workers. Instead, it's vanishing just to pay a premium on the same aluminum they've always used. This is where the automakers are caught in a perfectly built trap. Your first thought might be to just find another supplier. If Canada is too expensive, why not buy aluminum from Europe or Asia? The problem is they can't. A web of trade rules and global politics has slammed every other door shut. First, you have the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. This deal, which replaced NAFTA, has a critical rule of origin. It says that for a vehicle to be sold tariff-free in North America, a full 70% of the steel and aluminum used, that vehicle must come from North America. This rule basically chains Ford and GM to North American suppliers. They can't just call a smelter in Germany or South Korea without violating the USMCA and getting hit with a whole new set of brutal tariffs on their finished cars. Okay, so they have to buy North American. But why just Canada? The United States has its own aluminum producers. But the problem is scale. The US simply doesn't have the domestic capacity to meet its own demand, especially the massive appetite of the auto industry. For years, America has relied on its northern neighbor, and that reliance is stark. Canada supplies about 75% of all the primary aluminum the United States imports. The domestic supply just isn't there. So what about other options? The global situation has made them impossible. Russian aluminum is facing heavy sanctions, effectively banning it from the US market. Chinese aluminum is also locked out by existing duties, and just as importantly, new environmental regulations that can disqualify it. The automakers are in a box with no way out. They are required by the USMCA to buy North American aluminum, but the US doesn't make enough. That leaves only one major supplier with enough volume, Canada. And Canada knows it. This isn't a free market. It's a captive market, making key models that rely on cross-border parts like those with engines built in Mexico or Canada, hostages in this trade fight. Ford and GM aren't just in a tough spot. They are in crisis mode, trapped by rules and reality with no easy escape. Just when you think this couldn't get any more complex, another layer reveals itself. This isn't just about tariffs. It's also about climate policy and how Canada has cleverly turned American environmental goals into a powerful economic advantage. Let's call it Canada's green ace. To get this, you need to know a little about how aluminum is made. It's an incredibly energy-hungry process. In many parts of the world, that electricity comes from coal or natural gas. But Canada, especially Quebec, has a huge advantage: massive hydroelectric dams. Its aluminum smelters run on clean, renewable energy, giving their product a much lower carbon footprint. This is what's known as green aluminum. For a long time, this was a nice talking point for Canada, but not a huge economic lever. That all changed with the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. In a huge push for clean energy, the IRA created billions in tax credits for people who buy electric vehicles. But there was a catch. To get the full tax credit, a vehicle's battery and a growing list of its critical parts, including aluminum, must be sourced from North America or approved trading partners. Suddenly, green aluminum wasn't just a slogan, it was a golden ticket. Washington basically told automakers that if they wanted their customers to get a $7,500 tax credit, they had to start using clean North American sourced materials. This is where the cord trap snaps shut. Put yourself in the shoes of a GM executive. You could find cheaper, dirtier aluminum from a coal-powered smelter somewhere else, but use that and your new EV might not qualify for the IRA tax credits, putting it at a huge price disadvantage. The alternative: buy the clean, low-carbon aluminum from Canada. Canada is no longer just selling a metal, it's selling compliance. It's selling access to U.S. government subsidies. When an automaker calculates the total cost of a vehicle, they now have to think about the carbon footprint of every single part. This gives Canadian producers incredible pricing power. They can charge more for their green aluminum, not just because it's better for the planet, but because it's now a mandatory ingredient for any automaker who wants to compete in the American EV market. This advantage is layered on top of the Midwest premium, creating a double whammy for the automaker's bottom line. It's a masterclass in economic strategy, with Canada weaving two separate pieces of American law, trade protection, and green energy incentives into a system that forces U.S. companies to pay more for Canadian resources. This crisis brewing in Detroit's boardrooms might feel distant, but the shock waves are heading straight for your street and your wallet. The consequences of this trade fight are about to get very real for millions of people. The most immediate impact will be on new car prices. The industry is facing roughly $400 in added costs for every vehicle it makes. For a while, automakers were trying to swallow this hit, sacrificing their own profit margins to keep prices stable. But that can last. No company can just absorb these kinds of new expenses forever. That financial pressure has to go somewhere, and it will inevitably be passed on to you, the consumer. The $400 figure is just an average. For bigger vehicles that use more aluminum, like the trucks and SUVs that are the profit engines for Ford and GM, that number could be even higher. The next car you buy will have these premiums baked into the price. But it doesn't stop with higher prices. It extends right to the heart of the manufacturing base, the assembly line. When costs rise this dramatically, companies have to make tough choices. If a vehicle becomes unprofitable to build because aluminum is too expensive, an automaker might cut production. Fewer shifts at a factory mean fewer hours for workers. And in a worst-case scenario, it could lead to plant shutdowns, and the conflict is spreading. In a defensive move, Canada has announced its own protectionist measures, not with new tariffs on steel parts, but by making cuts to the number of tariff-free vehicles GM and Stellantis can import from their Mexican plants. This creates a vicious cycle. The US puts up a wall, so Canada puts up its own. This makes the entire North American supply chain more expensive and less efficient, creating uncertainty for businesses of all sizes. The ripple effect starts with aluminum but quickly spreads, touching everything from car prices to job security. Section 5. The political powder keg, USMCA, and global chaos. As if a corporate crisis and the threat of job losses weren't enough, this whole situation is sitting on a political powder keg. The trade agreements that once provided a stable foundation for business are now shaky, adding a terrifying layer of unpredictability. At the center of it all is the USMCA itself, the very trade deal causing so much grief for automakers. The deal is scheduled for a mandatory joint review by all three countries in mid-2026. What should be a routine checkup has turned into a high-stakes renegotiation that could rewrite the rules for the whole continent. The talk out of Washington has been anything but comforting, with some suggesting the agreement could be torn up entirely. This kind of uncertainty freezes investment and paralyzes long-term planning for automakers who have bet billions on the current rules. From Canada's perspective, they are being punished by an unreliable and hostile trading partner. Ottawa seems to be operating as if the old certainties are gone and they're taking steps to secure their economic future elsewhere, and they have options. While the North American market is tangled in disputes, a huge opportunity is opening up for Canada. In Europe, primary aluminum production in Europe has fallen, and with Russian supply still seen as toxic by many buyers, there is a massive void to be filled. Canada, with its clean, green aluminum and duty-free access to the EU, is perfectly positioned to become the continent's new go-to supplier. This gives Canada immense leverage. If the US market becomes too messy, Canada has a profitable alternative waiting. They don't need the US market as desperately as they once did. This fundamentally changes the balance of power. Canada can afford to play hardball in this trade dispute because they have a backup plan. It's a perfect storm: a corporate crisis, political instability, and shifting global alliances. The automakers are trapped in the middle, squeezed by a supplier who now holds all the cards and has another lucrative game to play across the Atlantic. This crisis is not a distant problem. It's a complex, fast-moving situation with real consequences for all of us. The decisions made in the coming months by politicians and executives will help determine the price of our cars, the security of our jobs, and the future of North American manufacturing. Staying informed is more critical than ever. If you want to keep up with the latest on this aluminum crisis and understand the powerful economic forces shaping your world, make sure you subscribe for more updates as we continue to track this story. We are watching a fundamental reset of the North American economy. A trade relationship once defined by cooperation has slid into a conflict fought with tariffs and strategic moves. It started when the United States imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian aluminum to protect its own industry. But that move backfired. Canada responded with a cold, calculated strategy. By using the Midwest premium, they passed the full cost of the American tariffs right back to Ford and GM. Then, using America's own green energy laws, they turned their low-carbon aluminum into a high-value commodity that's essential for building competitive EVs. The result is a perfect trap. Automakers now face $1 billion headache legally tied by the USMCA to buy North American aluminum, but with no real alternative to the expensive Canadian supply. This massive new cost is a ticking time bomb for consumer prices, threatening to add hundreds of dollars to a new car. All of this is happening against a backdrop of political uncertainty, with the USMCA's future in doubt. While automakers are caught in the crossfire, Canada is already pivoting, ready to supply a European market that's desperate for the very aluminum the US has made so hard to buy. This has become a high-stakes game of economic chicken, with billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs on the line. The big question is, who will blink first? Will the automakers facing a financial nightmare pressure Washington to back down? Will the US reverse its own tariff policy to save its iconic companies? Or will Canada, feeling its new strategic power, refuse to budge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.